Penguin Random House Audio presents Reading for Our Lives, the urgency of early literacy and the action plan to help your child. This is the author, Maya Payne Smart. For Zora, my daughter and inspiration. Without you, this book would surely not exist. Introduction. We should all be readers. The question is not whether we can afford to invest in every child. It is whether we can afford not to. Marian Wright Edelman. The Quiet Crisis. Heavy rain once filled our local water supply with so much silt and debris that treatment systems failed. For the next 7 days, local authorities and media raised the alarm that residents should boil their water or risk illness. Restaurants shut down. Families bought bottled water by the shelfful. Hospitals procured truckloads of certified water and switched operating rooms to alternative sterilization methods. Once the boil notice was lifted, we all flushed our pipes, dumped ice machines, and resumed life and work as usual. The crisis was obvious and urgent. The response clear and immediate. The end apparent. What's happening with our nation's pipeline to reading, if you can call it that, is just as urgent, yet hidden. There is no infrastructure in place to raise a nation of readers, let alone a coordinated response to breakdowns. We lack the basic systems of care, communication, connection, and family support required to nurture critical language and literacy skills in children from birth. We focus time, attention, and resources on the school years, neglecting the foundational brain, language, and social development upon which school and life success rest. Our results speak for themselves. Basic literacy skills among U.S. adults are weak overall, despite relatively high levels of education. And low literacy is unusually persistent across generations, judged by international standards. About 1 in 6 U.S. adults has low literacy skills, compared to, for example, 1 in 20 in Japan. That's approximately 36 million U.S. adults, roughly equal to the combined populations of New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, who can't compare and contrast written information, make low-level inferences, or locate information within a multi-part document. And worse still, socially disadvantaged parents in the U.S., compared to those in other countries, are more likely to pass on weaker skills to their children. Completing medical forms, reading prescription instructions, parsing a voting ballot, and grasping employment or housing contract details are all challenging, if not impossible, tasks for far too many. The huge disconnect between the reading skills many Americans have and those they need affects their health, wellness, employment, housing, and even likelihood of incarceration. But here's the part that all parents must understand. This crisis brews early. The tragedy of low adult literacy has its roots in infancy, when everyday early experiences launch lifelong learning trajectories. Children's brains form more than 1 million new neural connections per second during the first few years of life, and future brain development rests on the soundness or fragility of those earliest links. In fact, evidence from anatomical, physiological, and gene expression studies all suggest that basic brain architecture is in place by around 2 years old. And later brain development is mostly about refining the major circuits and networks that are already established. And critically, it's caregivers nurturing supportive, back-and-forth verbal engagement in a child's first years that literally stimulates brain function and shapes brain structure. If the tilt of a child's learning trajectory is too low or flat at the start, it's hard to reach expected levels of literacy during the school years and nearly impossible after. A slow start hurts a child's prospects much more than dropping out of school early. When a child enters school without the language skills, alphabetic knowledge, and social development to take advantage of grade-level instruction, it requires extraordinary acts of parent advocacy to navigate the phalanx of teachers, administrators, specialists, and paperwork required to get that child proper support to play catch-up. For most children, the worst-case scenario isn't complete illiteracy. And for this reason, the issue can remain off the radar of caring parents who assume that their children will eventually learn to read. Rather, the greater threat, for many, is the pain of an unnecessarily hard climb to barely proficient reading. It's the frustration, demoralization, and low self-esteem that comes from struggling mightily to learn how letters and sounds connect. It's the grueling labor of rigidly, robotically sounding out words without the fluency or automaticity to grasp their meaning individually, let alone within whole sentences, paragraphs, passages, or pages. It's the heartbreak of poor performance in math and other subjects when the nuances of course content, assignment details, and test instructions are missed. It's the disappointment and stagnation of reading capacity that never quite measures up to the demands of the college, the job, or the life they dream of. Doing time in school, for years, without ever receiving effective reading instruction is a special kind of torture that adds student shame to educational sham. For too long, as a nation, we've tested school-aged kids, reported their results, and acted like oversight is a reading achievement delivery system. But literacy doesn't flow from federal mandates through state assessments and district policy to classroom instruction and students' brains. Standardized assessments are valuable but limited, alert systems. Mere indicators. They can sound when our educational system fails to meet certain expectations. But they don't illuminate the root causes of that failure or tell us what to do about them. Alarms ring. They don't teach. And often, when an alarm rings for too long, we tune it out. Today, alarms abound. In the U.S., 5-year-olds have significantly lower emergent literacy than kids in other countries that have comprehensive early childhood education and national paid parental leave. Just 1/3 of a nationally representative sample of U.S. 4th and 8th grade students scored at a proficient level in the latest National Assessment of Educational Progress. Reading scores of the lowest performing 9 and 13-year-olds have dropped since 2012, reaching lows in reading levels that we haven't witnessed since the 1970s. And most devastatingly, just 14% of U.S. 15-year-olds read well enough to comprehend lengthy texts, handle abstract or counterintuitive concepts, and evaluate content and information sources to separate fact from opinion. And don't get me started on the state of children's reading interest and enjoyment. National surveys reveal skyrocketing percentages of 13-year-olds who say they never or hardly ever read for fun. 31% in a recent survey, compared with 8% in 1984. The sad truth is this. For the past few decades, the majority of American kids have been shuffled from grade to grade without ever reading well enough. And we're not talking about children with profound learning or intellectual disabilities. These are capable students whose reading development is hobbled by a devastating mix of untapped opportunity at home and inadequate instruction in schools. Incredibly, that's despite the fact that elementary schools devote more time to English, reading, and language arts than anything else. Often more than 30% of designated instructional time. In reality, much of that time is misspent on activities that don't directly teach what kids need to know about how written language works. Teachers struggle to meet the diverse needs of learners who arrive in their classrooms with little knowledge of the alphabet, the sounds of English, and the relationships between letters and sounds. They have trouble instilling these basics of the alphabetic code, let alone developing kids' oral language, vocabulary, and background knowledge so they can comprehend words in print. We can't afford to continue pretending that a hodgepodge of reactivity and remediation can get millions of children reading well enough to flourish. We can't leave whole populations without the skills.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?